Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Blue Line the Podcast, a podcast created for and aimed at all members of law enforcement. I'm Brittani Schroeder, editor of Blue Line magazine. Today, I'm joined by Brigadier General Vanessa Hanrahan, the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal and commander of the Canadian Armed Forces Military Police Group. We're going to be discussing the key priorities in her new role, significant changes to the military police over the last few years, and also the challenges that lie ahead. I'm really excited for this, so thank you for joining me today, Vanessa.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, as you might know, and as our listeners might know, I like to start off each podcast with a bit of background on my guest. So, can you share with us a bit about your journey with the Canadian Armed Forces and what led to where you are now?
Okay, so I actually come from a very small town in Newfoundland called Marystown. And I didn't actually come from a military family. I had one uncle who was in the military when I was growing up for a very short period of time. He made one deployment. And for me as a young child, really my interest lay in being a police officer. And so when I left for university, my goal was actually to do studies that would allow me to be a good candidate to join a police agency in Canada. While I was at university, like most people at university, we all need to look for a job to help pay for our tuition.
Yep.
So I actually saw an article in the newspaper that advertised for the communication reserve. And I went out on a limb and said, I'm just going to go and see what it's about. And that's how it all started.
Wow.
I joined not as a military police individual. I joined as a radio operator. Really, really love the military way of life. And when I was finished my education, I had to make a decision. I realized I could join my two passions together, and that was policing and military. Did some research and found out they have military police officers. And after university, applied. And 25, well, really almost 30 years later, with my reserve time, here I am today. And I think it's been a wonderful career. I attribute everything I have to the people I've worked with, to be honest. You get nowhere without a team. And I've had a really good career with lots of really good people who have helped me achieve my successes. And I really believe that they are the reason I've been afforded everything I'm afforded today. In terms of prep and what I've done, I've had a very, very diverse career. I've commanded at all levels, from a detachment commander to a formation commander. I've held the number of staff jobs, from the executive assistant to our provost marshal to special advisor. I've deployed 3 times on different missions in a policing capacity. And I think if I was to pick a couple of highlights, I would say to you that being the commander of the Army MP group was one of those highlights that I think really prepared me to be the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. As the commander of the group, I was responsible for about 1,000 people, both diverse and dispersed across Canada.
Wow.
So it really let me appreciate and understand what it meant to command from afar as well as up close. And so that was one of the things I really took into this position, because as you know, as the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal, I'm responsible for all military police in the Canadian Armed Forces, which of course are located all across the country and around the world. So having that experience was extremely helpful.
You read my mind. I was going to ask you what one of your favorite roles was. So you already got that from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think if I was to pick a second, I would say, so before becoming the CFPM, I was the deputy CFPM.
Yep.
And I think the difference in that was, though I wasn't in command, it exposed me to all of the institutional aspects of our military police program. So what I mean by that is our professional standards, our release of information, our analytics section. So it really let me see kind of the way in which we provide support to the Canadian Armed Forces and to our program to allow the frontline police officers to do what it is that they do. So I think that would probably be my second highlight in terms of affording me something different.
Yeah.
That really set up the conditions for me to understand kind of the holistic requirements of being the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal, which I get the privilege of being, and I really believe it is a privilege. I am honored to be the CFPM and work for the military police members of our branch.
I like that abbreviation, the CFPM. I might just continue with that as well.
Absolutely. You very much can.
Like we said earlier, it's a bit of a mouthful. So Now, for those who might not know, we kind of touched on it a little bit already, but what really goes into this role of the CFPM?
So the CFPM is appointed by our Chief of Defense Staff, and you basically act as the functional authority for the military police. And you have full command of all military police supporting the Canadian Forces and the Department of National Defense. So basically, I'm like a chief of police. That's probably the easiest way to say it. We just have a slightly different title that's based on their traditions of the military. But essentially, I would be responsible to provide all policing advice and guidance to the Chief of Defense Staff, our minister, and of course, our vice and other members of, our level ones of the Canadian Armed Forces. For me, ultimately, as the CFPM, I must deliver the military police program, of course, to our department and to the Canadian Armed Forces. So it's not just traditional military, or I should say traditional policing that you would see our civilian police counterparts go, though that is our core function. The uniqueness of the military police is that we have 5 functions that I must deliver. So in addition to providing what we would see in a municipal police force or a provincial police force, I'm also required to provide functions such as mobility support, security, the management of detained persons. We call it captured persons, so POWs and other things. And then, of course, stability policing. But the difference there is most of those are provided to the Canadian Armed Forces when they are on deployments outside of Canada. But for me, that is all part of our military policing program, and that is essentially what I am responsible to deliver.
Wow, that is a lot that you have to cover.
Yeah, but it's quite exciting, and it allows, I believe that there's value in diversity because it allows the military police to move within the different functions and to really become experts in a multitude and have some diversity in terms of employment opportunities that they may have as members of the military police.
Definitely. And I think that's a great way to look at it as well. Now, I'd love to know what your top priorities are going to be in this new role for you.
So my top priorities. I think like any police force, our top priority has to be the community we serve. That's just the reality of the situation. Without the community, we don't exist. For us, the defense community is who we serve, which is very, very similar to any other community. For us, it's, D&D members, CAF members, their families, and anyone else located on a military police establishment. So bases, wings, garrisons across the country. And we also support, the difference is we would also support Canadian Armed Forces members on deployment. So that would be the community that I'm responsible for. So for us, we have to provide that community with professional, competent police force, essentially. And for me, in order to do that, it's our people that is a huge priority, and how we support them and how we maintain their readiness in order for them to be able to accomplish the tasks that they are going to be assigned. So when we think about it, let's talk about our people, because ultimately our people are our most precious resource. And that I believe any chief of police would agree with that. So we need highly skilled, professional, competent military police who can do what the government of Canada asks them to do anywhere in the world. Without it, we can't possibly serve our community. So I need to invest in our people. That's what I think is my number one priority. And that really means is I want to make sure that they have what it is they need. But I really think what it is I need to make sure that they feel that they have an organization that allows their voice to be heard. Mm-hmm. Comes with communication. I think anyone would argue sometimes one of the biggest things we always need to work on and improve is communication. So for me, it's really making sure that I'm out there, that I'm allowing our military police members to be empowered and to know that, the organization that they chose to work for is willing to talk to them, is willing to ensure that they're heard, is willing to ensure that they feel they are a valued member of the team. And that's done through constant communication at all levels with all ranks. And if I could say one other thing, I think communication also allows us to deal with the uncertainty that exists every day in our world. And sometimes uncertainty causes a lot of angst. And therefore, when we deal with that, when we can't always get rid of uncertainty, I would argue that that's just the reality of being in a policing environment or in the CAF, but you can choose to make sure that the communication minimizes the level of uncertainty and therefore contributes to how it is our military police members have a good work-life balance. What else would I say was my top priority? I think another one comes with training. And the reason I say that is over the past several years, we've really focused on providing police professionalism and our police training requirements. And in the ever-changing worlds of today, as you realize, we need to be prepared for all possible avenues.
Mm-hmm.
That really comes back to those other functions of military policing that we really need to start making sure our people are well trained to be able to provide. So I think it's fair to say that the military police training is second to none. We provide exceptional training. We have a wonderful academy at CFB Borden that focuses solely on right now to provision of police-related training to all of our military police members at all levels of rank. For us, the difference is we do what you would consider your basic policing training, but then they must do 4 other levels of training. So every time they take on a different leadership role, we bring them back to our police academy to reinforce the policing leadership requirements of their job that may be different than the corporal that's doing the frontline policing.
Right.
So now it's adding into that training environment. How do we provide those land-centric tasks? So how do I make sure that military police can provide a captured person's capability to the Canadian Armed Forces when they're on deployments such as Op Reassurance that's taking place right now, as well as mobility support and security? Because all of those tasks are really key to the success of the CAF operations, but it's really the military police who are those subject matter experts whom commanders rely on to be able to do that job. So I think we have to refocus a bit to bring those skill sets up in line with the level of professionalism we have in our policing component of the military police. Yeah, so those are the top 2. I probably could talk to you about millions. I have so many ideas, but people keep reminding me that we all have to have an appetite because we need people to do all of these brilliant ideas. I think as a last one, I would argue probably making sure we have really good streamlined processes. I think we really need to look at how we are delivering our capabilities in the most efficient and effective manner, specifically when we talk about some of the resources, because like anyone, resources are finite. So we need to make sure that we're really looking to have we're using people and other resources the way we need to do them.
Yep.
So, we need to look at embracing such things as digitization and technology, so that we're using people where we need to use people. And we're using digitization and technology to do those tasks that we don't need people to do, and really making sure that we've got a sound way forward about the balancing of our resources. And that could be from a structural perspective to, how we do our business rules for data management, to anything that actually has an impact on the ability to deliver our services. And I think the time is right now, when we look across, the Canadian Armed Forces, or even I would argue any major institution in Canada, we're all in the point where we're trying to hire and there's just not enough people to do all of the jobs.
Yep.
So I think, the environment is right where we need to make sure those critical resources are being used where those critical resources need to be. And we've embraced technology, not just said we're going to use it, but really found ways to embrace technology to multiply the finite level of things that we have.
Definitely. I think that's so smart. And I see that a lot with police services across Canada. They're really trying to find that technology that will help them, like you said, streamline processes. So that's something you guys definitely have in common as well. But going back to that first priority of people, I'd love to know also the mental health of your people. Would that also fall into it as well, and making sure that they're invested in and they're a priority?
Oh, of course. So I think you need to look at the health and wellness of all of our people, right? So I think the Canadian Armed Forces has a really good program. I mean, I think we're a bit unique because for us, we have a dedicated, health and wellness program that we as military members get to take advantage of, that I think is really second to none. We often will complain about the level of service we get, but when I listen to some of my civilian counterparts, I can fully appreciate that the level of service I receive is definitely second to none when it comes to the delivery, and that includes mental health services. In fact, I had a conversation recently at a town hall where I remarked that I consider mental health services the same way as I consider brushing my teeth. We never question why we brush our teeth. We do it twice a day minimum because it prevents cavities. Yeah. And I think what we need to think about is going to see mental health services is exactly the same thing. And we need to ensure that it is embedded in exactly that. We're not waiting to be in crisis to go see mental health services. I think we should be doing mental health services the same way we do any other preventative kind of physical fitness, physical service, and go in ahead of time, do it on a regular basis so that when you are in crisis, you actually have coping mechanisms to help you get out of them faster, or at least to maybe even avoid them if at all costs. And I think we have our own military police. So we have R2MR, I'm trying to remember, for MP, Road to Mental Readiness for Military Police. I'm like, I know the acronym, but it's not always easy to remember.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, so that takes the aspects of the Canadian Armed Forces mental health program and our resiliency program, I would call it, and actually makes it specific for people who work in a policing environment. And that is a program that we've embraced for a number of years now. We're constantly looking for ways to improve it in order to make sure it's the little things that matter. So right from day one, we've integrated into our military policing mindset that you need to be looking to ensure you're maintaining your mental resiliency. And that is through our R2MR for MP program, which is second to none. It's fantastic.
That's so good to hear, and I'm glad that you also view it that way, as it's the same as brushing your teeth. I love that. I'm going to use that going forward.
You absolutely should. I firmly believe that is exactly it. There should be no stigma, and I certainly don't. I would openly talk with people about, look, sometimes we all have to talk to people. It may be a professional, it may be a padre, or a priest. It could be anybody, but that's all part of how you deal with mental resiliency. And there's no stigma around that today. That's gone. I think you're actually a better person and a better leader if you're more than willing to admit that it actually is something we all should be doing, because there's always a point where we all could use another voice in our head to help us get through something.
Yep, 100%. Now, the military police have undergone some big changes over the last few years, and I know that there's probably a lot more than what we can cover today, but I'd love to walk through some of those with you and see how they've might have impacted operations or changed operations.
Okay, so I have a couple for you that I thought, from my perspective, had a major impact in the last couple of years. And these are just two of many, just to be sure. But I thought I would talk to you a little bit about Bill C-77 and what that really meant for the military police. So Bill C-77 was implemented in 2020. And along with giving the Declaration of Victims' Rights into the military justice system, which basically is the same as the charter in the civilian system, what it did was it actually gave the authority for all members of the military police to lay charges under our Code of Service Discipline. What's not known by everyone is, prior to the implementation of Bill C-77, all military police personnel could lay charges under the Criminal Code of Canada, but only a distinct few could lay charges under our National Defence Act Code of Service Discipline. And that was specific to members posted to the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. And so for me, Bill C-77 really leveled the playing field and really allowed now all members of the military police who have the exact same training to be able to now actually lay charges in whichever system. So the civilian justice system or the military justice system, whichever system best suits the evidence that's provided that meets the elements of the offense. So really, it allows a lot of flexibility for members of our military police when they're doing their job of investigating the incident that's been provided to them. And it really allows them to ensure that we're addressing it in the system that best suits the crime. But for me, what it really did from a CFPM perspective is it reinforced independence of the military police. So, we do have independence from the chain of command. We often get asked questions about, do you have to take direction from the CDS when it comes to investigations, and they can impede on your independence as, a member of the military justice system for policing. And I would argue it does not. And Bill C-77 really did look to reinforce that, because in the past, military police investigators would have to investigate. And if they had a Code of Service Discipline offense, they would have to then give that to a military chain of command to decide whether or not charges would be laid. And today, that is no longer required. The military police investigator forms their reasonable probable grounds. They determine that the military justice system is the best system for which we should lay the charge, and then they can move forward and lay the charges. And the only person who can give them direction and guidance about that type of an investigation is myself or one of my delegated police leaders. So it really did reinforce ensuring that the military police, within our policy and our law, had been given that before. So I really thought that was a really nice change for us. And I think it really empowered members of the military police. In fact, I would argue it probably was a dissatisfier from some of our frontline police officers. And now really, because you're doing your job, you're doing your investigation. If it was a criminal code offense, you could lay the charge, but because it's a code of service discipline offense, you could not. And now really it has leveled that, and they can actually now lay the charge. So I like to believe we've actually seen that as putting another tool in the toolbox of our military police personnel for them to really have their authorities and jurisdiction to do what they think is right. And again, for me, reinforces my independence, which I always knew we had, and I had no question, but having embedded in law certainly goes a long way.
I like that it reinforces it for you guys. Like you said, you already knew it, but it's good for everyone to know.
Absolutely. I think it just reinforces when we have people out there who question our independence to be able to say, here are all the tools for which I can clearly articulate my independence from the Canadian Armed Forces when it comes to my specific role being, essentially the chief of police for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second one I thought I would talk to you about, there's been a lot of discussion, and I'm not sure if you're attuned to it, about military police professional standards, our conduct, and all of those things. There's been a lot of public discussion and some articles recently over the last year about that. And what's unknown to a lot of people is we've done a lot of work in revising our professional standards processes over the last year and a half. We've taken a lot of effort to look at everything to really determine how it is we have been doing and addressing both public conduct complaints, what we would often refer to as Part 4 National Defense Act complaints, internal conduct complaints. So we have a military police professional code of conduct that we then use as our authority to determine whether or not the military police have done something that would be against our code of conduct. And then we can take appropriate administrative or disciplinary action to address any of those concerns.
Right.
And over the last year, what we've really focused on is, first and foremost, giving them some additional staff to deal with the large volume and increase in the number of complaints that we have received, but also to look at all of the processes within the organization of professional standards to really start to streamline them. And we've really seen that because of that, we now have a more timely application of our conduct complaint process. And a second thing that I'm actually very proud of is we've amended our process to give complainants more of a voice and an involvement in the investigative process, which I think is really, really important because I think it helps them understand not just the process, but some of the findings and the outcomes and why it is we sometimes don't provide them all of the information about how we're addressing individuals, but more that they understand that it is being done. So I think it really enforces kind of public trust and confidence in our ability to address it and hold people accountable.
Yeah.
Because of course, at the end of the day, accountability is the cornerstone to our credibility. So, we want to really make sure that we had a system in place that was timely, was process driven, but really had that victim-centered trauma-informed approach, which we use for all of our investigations when we look at it from a criminal perspective. But I think the same thing applies from a professional standards perspective, except we don't have a victim, we have a complainant. And some might argue they may see themselves as somewhat of a victim because they believe they were a victim of police misconduct.
Right.
So really that's what we've done. And then what we've ensured is that at the outcome of that investigation, if there is identified misconduct, that the individuals are held accountable for that misconduct and held accountable to the level that actually addresses the misconduct that took place. Because of course, for me, as the CFPM, I have the authority to suspend you from policing duties or functions. I have the authority to actually provide you corrective action to address any training or policy related concerns, or I could actually revoke your authority to be a member of the military police. So it's quite substantial in terms of the authorities of the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. And our process really ensures that we are using that system most effectively to deal with the level of misconduct that was presented during the course of that investigation. So I think that our changes and how we've now I call it revolutionized our professional standards process, I think has really gained traction internally with our military police members, because you can imagine being under investigation for in excess of 2 to 3 years is extremely stressful. So to remove some of that, to reduce those timelines, to really close that off and allow them to understand what needs to happen. And if it's unfounded, to clear them from what has happened, is extremely important for their mental health and resiliency. And then on the second, I think it's really starting to ensure we're maintaining and building that public trust and confidence that is essential to our policing component of the military police.
Completely. And it's like you said, it's making it clearer for your members. It's making it clearer for the community. And I see no negative in that at all. I only see positives.
Fantastic. I hope so too.
Now, what are some of the biggest issues that are facing Canada's military police right now? And on the flip side, how do you hope some of those issues might be solved going forward?
So I would argue there's probably many challenges, but ours would probably be similar to any other major police organization or any major institution in Canada right now. I think the first and foremost is our reconstitution. So that would be our recruiting and our retention. How do I solve that? I actually don't know that there's an easy answer to that challenge. And I say that because recruitment and retention has an aspect of individuality that can't forget. What would be important for me is not necessarily important for the person standing beside me. And what would attract me to the Canadian Armed Forces or the military police and attract you might be significantly different. So how do I deal with it en masse? And how do I make sure we're doing something? I think we need to be an employer of choice. That's what I think. And I think if we look at it from that mindset, then we look to do everything that makes us be an employer of choice. And the first thing that I want is we want MP members to come to work. We want MP members to believe that they're empowered to do their job. We want MP members who feel that they're contributing members of the team and that their chain of command has trust and confidence in their ability to do their job. And why do I think that would help with recruiting and retention? Because I think our members are our biggest ambassadors. Point final. They are the ones who recruit the most people. You can recruit standing at the bus stop. You can recruit when you're shopping. You can recruit at any aspect of your life when you actually talk about how awesome the organization you work for is.
Definitely.
And that's not to say that they're, I don't like this or I don't like that. But when the resounding effect is you are recommending to someone to join this organization, then I think you are contributing to that reconstitution issue that we're all addressing today. So that's really why I think what we need to do is find a way to ensure that we are employers of choice for the people in our organization because they've already chosen to join. Now we just have to convince them to stay. Right?
Yes.
So if we focus there, then we really are now creating ambassadors that are going to go out. They're not just going to recruit new people. When they have people inside the organization who are a bit dissatisfied with their work environment, who are considering other options, they are actually sitting in the room with them and they're able to maybe convince them to stay or certainly give them enough cause for pause to determine whether or not leaving is the best option. Because if maybe there's something inside the Canadian Armed Forces and the military police that the other organization doesn't have. So I think for me, that's how I think we need to address it because I don't think there's a one shoe fits all approach to recruitment and retention for us.
Of course not. And I mean, look at you. You wanted to be a regular municipal police officer, and then you found yourself really in love with this career path. So that could also happen to someone else down the road.
Absolutely. And again, I believe, we often have the opportunity to talk to people all across Canada in many different environments. I mean, I was sitting at the passport office the other day and I was in my uniform and someone happened to ask me what's my red beret mean, and I had a huge conversation and they were like, you're so positive about your job. And I'm like, of course I am. I think I have the best job in the world, by the way, as the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal. I get to represent some amazing people every single day, but I think that I'm hopeful that resounds with people. So when they're sitting there making a choice, they're like, you know what? I remember that day that person really loved what they did. And maybe that's an opportunity for me. And whether you stay for 30 days or you stay for 30 years, you know what? The fact that you chose to join is something. And it means if we have that multiplied across all of the members of our organization, imagine the powerful impact we could have when it comes to actually having us be an employer of choice in a world where everybody is looking for people, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any other big challenge that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so the second challenge that I kind of thought was one that maybe we could talk a little bit about really comes to the use of digitization. And this is very specific for us, I think, in the military police. And I would argue probably expands to a lot of our law enforcement counterparts as well. We collect a lot of data in our day-to-day kind of dealings and interactions with the public and investigating. And, we do a lot of calls for service, and we have a lot of data about what we're responding to within our communities. And now it's, I use that to do my own kind of analysis and decision-making cycle. So it informs me on how I might make some decisions about resources and applying resources. Do I have the right people in the right place based on the call demand and all of those kinds of things. But now what I think we need to look at is how do we use that data to allow it to affect the larger institution? And maybe that's very specific for me in the CAF, but I look at things where I have some data that would allow chains of command and commanders to have a better appreciation of some of the issues that may be happening on their bases. And they see small pieces of data, but I see large aggregate data. And so now I'm looking for ways to ensure that I'm able to provide that data, protecting the privacy rights of people involved, but provide the data so that it allows for institutional influence in a decision-making cycle. So one example I will give you, for example, right now I'm working on a program where, you alluded to mental health and how important mental health is today. So for the organization like the Canadian Armed Forces, we have many, many contributing factors that affect the mental health of our members. Yep. And we have a fantastic program, and I'll keep reiterating that because I truly think we do. But that doesn't mean people aren't in crisis and people don't, need help, and they don't necessarily always know where to go to get the help when they need it. And one of the things the military police are often called to do is respond. And we call them welfare checks. But really, and lots of police agencies across Canada will do the exact same thing. They get a call that says, I'm really worried about, my family member, my friend, I can't get in touch with them. Can you go please and make sure that they're okay? So that's no different for us. And I was sitting there over the course of the last few months, and I said, every day I get a wrap up and I see all these, call for assistance, call to see if the person's doing okay, whether it's family members calling the MPs to check, chains of command calling the MPs. So now I'm actually using the aggregate data that likely only us in a policing world would have access to say, look, across the organization, this is how often the military police are called out to a member in crisis. And I'm actually able to put that together so it presents it by military establishment across the country, by environmental affiliation. So by that, I mean Army, Navy, Air Force. So we can actually start to paint a picture to say, I don't know if there is a problem, but I just need you to be aware of how often we get called out to help members in crisis. Yeah. And is there a way for us to see if we can use that data to help fix a problem that may or may not exist in the future, but certainly be educated to this is what's happening and be able to then use other stakeholders that exist both externally and internally to the military to actually address that issue. Even if it means one more person gets help and they don't have to call the MPs in crisis, that's a win. And if all it takes is, using the data that's readily available in our system to actually influence strategic change across the institution, that's a win-win. That's a benefit for the Canadian Armed Forces. That's a benefit for Canadian society because we are citizens of Canada. So I believe anything we do to make ourselves better contributes to the overall effectiveness of Canadians in general. So those are things I think are challenges because we don't seem to be, it's not natural that we look at this going, how could this be used at the institutional level to affect the Canadian Armed Forces? We really do just keep it at our own level. So I'm kind of trying to look at it differently and trying to see if there are things we can learn from others and ourselves to actually have what I consider, institutional strategic change that is for the betterment of all.
That's so smart. You're, like you said, you're taking that data that you already have, you're taking it to more of like a high level. Let's find the key themes and key areas that we're seeing repetitively. And then you're going to hopefully make change from that. I think that is so smart.
Thank you. I'm very hopeful it will be successful. I know when we started, initially looking at it, there was a lot of, wow, we never realized, even my own people. So our analytics section putting the data together, they're like, oh my gosh, now that you've actually asked us to compile it, it's amazing to see the statistics and how the statistics are rising and falling. What time of year we have more calls and crises than, so we're really able to determine, what are the factors at that base at that time that may be actually contributing to the mental crisis of individuals that would really allow a chain of command to then implement preventative measures to make sure that those people that serve our country are so well looked after. So I am extremely hopeful that it will be of great value for everyone.
Of course. And I can only imagine, like you kind of alluded to it there, but when you're in it every day and you're the one going out to see those calls, like you don't see those trends, right? You just see you went to this call, you went to that call, you went to this call. But like when you are able to take that step back and see, like you said, like different times of year and like what kinds of calls pop up then, like it will put everything into perspective for you guys.
Oh, absolutely. And again, this is not, I look at this is not a fault of people not seeing it like that. I think it's because, if you're a unit commanding officer, you only know what happened in your unit.
Exactly.
Right. So you may only have one or two, which now you're dealing with an individual, but not at the next level versus, I look at it and then you're at a formation where you may have 4 or 5. Whereas, and again, of the call that came from your unit, maybe not the call that came from your family. Whereas for us, we see so much in aggregate. So yeah, I'm very hopeful that the data will be used effectively. And I think this is the first step. I think this is, for me, this was a very good one because I think, again, mental health is so important for us. I mean, it builds resiliency. And without resiliency, we can't do our jobs. I mean, this is the reality, right? We need to make sure our personnel are built with resiliency because we ask them to do some very difficult things. Members of the military police and members of the CAF are asked to do some very difficult things and very different situations sometimes, and having resiliency to be able to stand the test of time. I often say, someone told me you're training for a marathon, and I used to say that for years and years and years. Guys, we're training for a marathon, so you got to train properly. I heard someone, and I don't remember who, quote to me, "It's not a marathon. It's a number of sprints." So you're in a sprint, then you have your slow time. We really need to make sure we're taking care of our people in the slow time because the next sprint is coming. And then we need to make sure we're not in a constant sprint. So I look at that going, when we put that data together, we can take advantage of the slow period before the next sprint to make sure our people are being helped where they need to be helped to be ready for the next sprint.
Especially since you don't know when that next sprint is coming.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It could be tomorrow.
Let's hope it's not tomorrow.
I hope not.
I'm not ready for a sprint tomorrow. Now, looking forward into the next few years, I'd love to know what your hopes are for the future as you grow in this role and you move forward with the military police.
So I don't think I'm any different than any other leader. And that's to say that when you're in a position such as the CFPM, your goal really is to ensure you're leaving the organization you just walked into better than when you arrived. Mm-hmm. And that really is to say we are always evolving and growing, and we all want to always be moving forward and improving ourselves. So really, I think every leader always looks and says, if I can just make it a little bit better, that is always the achievement of success. We'll never get everything we want, but we just need to move the yardstick a little bit further down the road on some good issues. So for me, I have so much immense pride in the military police members that I work with. They're there every day doing what it is they need to do day in and day out. And I just need to make sure that I'm giving them the support that they need to do it. I'm really hopeful that my leadership will enhance and empower them to do what I ask and everyone asks them to do. I need to make sure I give them the right tools and equipment and authorities to achieve success. That's really what it is. More importantly than ever, I think for me, as the CFPM, I need to develop leaders for the future, both officers and NCMs. I always say the success of a leader is their ability to ensure that their subordinates surpass their successes. That really means that, in some aspects, I've created an environment that empowers them to be able to learn. I've created an ability for them to grow professionally. Mm-hmm. I've created the ability for them to learn from my mistakes so they don't repeat the same ones, because we all make mistakes.
Yep.
And therefore I'm giving them what I think best prepares them to be the future CFPMs. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very important thing. And I'm very hopeful that in my tenure as the CFPM, I really have an environment where that is seen to be something extremely important. And if I could say last but not least, I want to impart to members of the military police branch, I think probably the defense community and even Canadians as a whole, a little piece of what I get to see every day. I think it's a privilege to be the CFPM. I'm probably going to get emotional because it's just, I have so much pride in what they do.
That's okay.
And I think the men and women who choose to put on a uniform, whether it's a military police uniform, a military uniform, a civilian police uniform, they truly do choose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that and put themselves in harm's way simply to protect those in need. And I get the absolute honor of being the representative for the military police. And I really hope that over my tenure, I can impart on everyone a little bit of what I know, which is that the military police and their counterparts have chosen this profession, and each day they make their decisions with the best of intentions to do what they believe is right for the community that they serve. And if I can let one person see a little bit inside that cloak of why it is civilian police, military police, anybody in law enforcement choose to do that, then I think I've achieved success, because I think I get to see that more than anybody. And it's very quick to, highlight sometimes the mistakes that we may do. But I think what we really look at is the hard work and dedication and the devotion that all members of the military police, but I would argue every person who chooses to be a law enforcement member in Canada, does every day solely for the protection of those that they serve.
I don't think there's a better way that we could end our podcast. So I'm actually going to end it right there, because that is just like the perfect last statement. I'm so happy about that. So Vanessa, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I know I learned a lot, and I know our listeners definitely learned a lot. And I'm really glad that we were able to get some more information out about the military police. And like you said, we're going to stop focusing on like the negatives, right? This is hopefully going to show the positives of it as well, because I don't think we get enough of that.
That's fantastic. I just want to say thank you for actually allowing me to have the opportunity to share with you, but I would argue a very larger audience, a little bit about the military police, and certainly a little bit about how it is we're unique, but the same, and how at the end of the day, we're all humans that are really just trying to make Canada a better place for everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And for everyone who tuned in today, we hope that you enjoyed this episode of Blue Line, the podcast. You can check us out on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also stay up to date on all of your Canadian policing news at blueline.ca. Until next time, stay safe and be well.